We invite you to be part of something bigger. Support Viva Magazine Live and make history with us. Support the vision and invest in our community. Hola, Houston. Welcome to Viva Magazine Live. I'm your host, Blanco, and this is the place where we celebrate movers and shakers and trailblazers of the vibrant Latino community. And today we have with us Mr. Erik Ibarra. He is the founder of Magnolia Fund. This is a project where the East End residents get to invest in their own communities. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Viva Magazine Live. I'm your host, Blanco, and today we have with us is Mr. Erik Ibarra. Welcome, Erik. I'm so glad you're on the show today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. I've been wanting to know about Erik. And Erik, I know that you are from Magnolia Park. Mm-hmm. What made you journey back to the neighborhood, let's say?
Well, really when I moved away, it was to go to college.
I see.
It was really because 35 years ago, growing up in the neighborhood, the advice was, hey, you got to get out of here. It was a rough neighborhood, and some may consider it rough today, but I consider it rough for way different reasons than it is today.
Right.
And back then,
what reasons are those?
Honestly, there were gangs, there was a lot of violence, but I think today we see other issues with folks on Harrisburg, homeless population, undocumented folks. And just in general, a lot of economic challenges around the city, but we also see it on Harrisburg.
Right. So you came back to make a difference in your community.
Really, I left for 4 years, but when I was in college and in a little bit in my career in South Carolina, I got to see a lot of different perspectives. I got to travel a little bit. And then coming back, I lived in Second Ward for about 11, 12 years. And I actually lived in a warehouse until
in a warehouse, Erik?
I lived in a warehouse,
really?
Yep. Until the landlord told me that he would need to tear it down to build a parking lot for the building he was redeveloping next door. And so I literally felt the pinch of gentrification in 2021. And around that time was around the time when I knew that I wanted to do something in the neighborhood. I didn't know what at all. Right. And I started kind of talking with friends and people that I knew from the neighborhood to try and understand if I was just crazy or if I was feeling something they were feeling as well.
I've never thought, I've met you about a couple of years ago, and I've never even considered that you were crazy.
Oh, well, appreciate that. Yeah.
Just kidding. I'm just kidding. So let me ask you this question then. What inspired you? Was that what you just told me inspired you to launch the Magnolia Fund, or was it something else?
I think, to be completely honest with you, any business, I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years, and every company, it's been 8 different companies now. It's always something that bothers you a little bit about the way things work, that you feel you can make a difference, you can change.
Right.
And I think with every project, you go into it thinking, well, I think we might try this, and then things change. And if you can adapt and if you can change it well enough, and you can understand your customers and who you're really serving, your stakeholders, you can be successful. And I think that's what we've done over the past really 4 years that we've been thinking about Magnolia Fund. It started by speaking to folks that are in the neighborhood, whether they're a community leader, a nonprofit, a business owner, or a resident, people we grew up with. And over the last 4 years, realized that it's important that we invest in our neighborhood and we allow anyone to invest, not just the super rich or the people who have the ability to.
How did you envision this project evolving?
Today, what we're at is 3 weeks ago, we just launched our community round, which means we've been able to succeed in our goal of allowing anyone to invest. They can go to our website, magnolia.fund, to get more information. But 2 years ago, I would say, we really started thinking, how about we get folks that are from the neighborhood that might be able to write larger checks. We raise on a private round, which just means that we can't advertise it. There's a lot of rules from the SEC and the federal government. Can't advertise a private round, but now that we have a public round, it's totally okay to talk about. And there's reasons for that, obviously, but the main important thing is the earliest of investors, 100% of them were all from the neighborhood. So it was great to get those perspectives and great to feel like we've got some people that really want to back us and want to see us succeed.
Right, and it's great to own a piece of the neighborhood and not let it have that, you wish you would have bought that lot next door, and I wish I would have invested and own a little bit of the neighborhood.
Yep.
And so share a personal story with me.
Sure. Well, I mentioned the warehouse I used to live in, so that's one piece. And I think that's, you know, for me, as this landlord is asking me to move, I didn't realize I was feeling the pain of gentrification. I was thrilled that I had the wherewithal to, you know, rent somewhere else.
Right.
And eventually, I think a year or two later, I bought a house. But, you know, the real, I guess if you want to talk about some of this, my history and kind of my upbringing, we actually came to Magnolia Park when I was about 5. And it was because my parents divorced, and since my grandfather, my mom's dad, lived here, this was home.
Yeah.
And so we found ourselves back in the neighborhood, and we stayed with family because, quite frankly, we didn't have a home for quite a while.
Right.
Then when we finally got a home in the Pineview Triangle, which is off of Harrisburg and 75th, we stayed there for about 8 years until that landlord decided he wanted his house back. We were paying our rent on time. We didn't own that house, but
And that happens a lot.
we got kicked out because he wanted his house back. And so that wasn't necessarily gentrification,
No.
but what that taught me is that if you don't own it, you don't control it.
That's right. That's a lesson to learn. You don't own it, you don't control it.
And made that one of our founding principles, right?
Yes.
We want to have more ownership in the neighborhood.
Erick, what is gentrification? I mean, explain it so the audience can know what exactly that means to folks out here in the East End.
Sure. It really, and you know, there's been many books written about it, but our definition, and at least for the East End, is one group of people coming into a neighborhood and raising the property values and making it a little more difficult and, quite frankly, pushing out the people that are already here.
Right.
And this has happened countless times across the country and over the last probably century and a half, quite frankly.
Right.
And these are, in this neighborhood at least, you see new sidewalks or you see new power lines when there've always been wooden power poles. And you start to see these little indicators that something is changing, and typically it's driven by larger developers.
Right.
Larger developers demand that infrastructure like power, water, those things be adjusted and fixed before they will go into a neighborhood, before they can open up. And when you see those things, it's a telltale sign that we're experiencing gentrification.
Right. Who are your biggest supporters and collaborators with this project? I mean, was it just an idea you had and, you know, there it is, or you brought in some folks?
Well, you know, originally I think it was eight investors who all decided to pitch in at the very early days. To give you an idea, you know, we're talking about investors who are like myself. You know, 3 of them I went to high school with. And the idea was, you know, we think we can put together a little bit of money, but that's really just the start. That helps us get started. And to be successful, we need to have a much larger pool of investors. Well, one of the first investors, and in fact, the first check that was written into the fund was a good friend of mine. His name was Marcelo Ox Garcia III. He was a firefighter, and about a month ago, he recently passed in battling a fire, sadly enough, on the same street that we have our property on 66th.
My God, that is a sad and tragic story, and he was our neighbor down the street.
That's right. That's right.
Down the street, yes.
Yep. And
he was a good guy.
He really was. Yeah, through and through.
Yeah.
So when you ask, you know, who are our biggest supporters, I have to say he probably was our biggest because not only was he there as an investor, but he brought a lot of people to the table.
Yes.
And, you know, over the last month, I've had a chance to meet people I've never met from his friend group, from the firefighters. And I know they're not just entertaining me or making me feel better. They literally tell me things like, oh yeah, you know, Ox told me about the deal and told me about your property and, you know, I want to participate. And so I just can't imagine all the times he told somebody about the deal. So it's been great.
Well, he was a great communicator as well, and people just loved him.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about the difference that the Magnolia Fund is making in Houston. I mean, I say Houston, but I also mean especially the East End.
Sure.
I mean, what are the key issues for the community and that the Magnolia Fund addresses?
Yeah, and you know, our goal initially was to create an investment that everybody could participate in.
Right.
And in my mind, I thought, what a great idea. But then I had to sort of question myself and really take a step back to go, why? Why is that important? And I think as an entrepreneur, you keep asking why. because your customers are asking it. Even if they don't tell you, they're asking, why are you doing this?
Yes.
And for us,
that is a good question to ask.
We had to kind of think about it, because if I believe a real estate investment is a good idea, why is that? And in my mind, and from what we can tell, if you're thinking about generational wealth at all, you're thinking about, what am I passing on to the next generation, my children and my family? And for our counterparts, our non-Latino counterparts, and folks that are used to being passed down wealth, they don't have to think about it, quite frankly.
Yes.
It's already kind of been figured out.
That's right. Not out here.
Not out here. And some families, sure, they figured it out, but what we're trying to do is create that spark. So number one goal, we're trying to spark generational wealth. And get people to think about, what am I leaving to the next generation?
Exactly.
And then, like I mentioned, with the gentrification and with big developers coming in, it's not only making it difficult for residents to stay here, but for business owners. So we looked at food as, something in the East End. Food has not only been something we are very proud of, but if you think about the Lorenzo's, Nifa Lorenzo, if you think about the Champ Burger, if you think about Mandola's, these are examples, and Irma's, these are examples of food turning into generational wealth for these families. And we took inspiration from that and said,
El
you know what? El Jardín, that's right. So sparking generation, I love Don Carlos. Every time I pass by, I'm like, maybe I can stop.
I know, there's so many good restaurants in the East End.
And that's it. That is an example of generational wealth in motion. And it's an example of food being able to.
I forgot one. Don Araquis. There's another one.
Don Araquis, yes.
I just thought about it, so I had to mention it.
That's perfect. No, so goal number 2 is to elevate food founders, because food founders are there to make a living, but they're also trying to create for their families.
Yes.
So the third thing we're doing, we feel strongly that our culture is so special here in the East End. And if we're not doing things to proactively preserve that culture and protect it, then it's possible that we may think about it one day and go, wasn't it great when we had X, when we had this restaurant, when we had this space.
You remember when, and they talked like that. Remember when this was here and this was there and now it's gone.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yep. So those are the 3 things that we're hoping to accomplish, and sparking generational wealth, elevating food makers, and preserving the culture.
Tell me a little bit about elevating the food makers. Okay, I know that you have an area over there off of Harrisburg, and you've got several restaurateurs that are on your fund. What are they going to do there?
Right. We're building a shared kitchen. It's an innovative model where we create a 2,000 square foot kitchen that multiple restaurateurs, caterers, chefs, they can all be in there at the same time. They're paying by the hour to be there, but that cost far less than opening up their own restaurant or buying their own and creating their own kitchen. And it allows food makers to really make sure that they have all the resources they need to be successful. And then we'd also like to connect them with entrepreneurs who've been there, who've already struggled and have succeeded and have learned those valuable lessons they can pass on again to the next generation, this time the next generation of restaurateurs.
That's awesome. I mean, that is like, wow, that probably would help them save a lot of money on catering purposes, or if they don't have a big kitchen and they're small restaurants and they need to do catering, they can do it there. I mean, they can fix all the food there.
Definitely. This is really for a lot of entrepreneurs who are not just starting out. There's some that are just starting out, but there are restaurateurs and there are caterers that they need more space because either they're operating out of their home and they're getting ready to make that jump to a big space or a bigger space, or they are looking for that scalability. They know catering, they can only do so much in their kitchen.
Right. Well, I was going to ask you to share a success story, but you just did. You've actually had the project, how many weeks now?
We've had the fund open to the public for about 3 weeks now. And we've also had a couple of community events. So we have the property under contract, but we're able to actually activate the property with events. And every time we have a food maker out, every time we have an event, we have a food maker out, they're selling their food, and at least on 2 occasions, food makers have sold out completely.
Really?
So yeah,
Wow.
it's a great opportunity for food makers.
You invited me. At that time I just couldn't go. You had some movies. You shown some movies out
Definitely.
on the piece of property there.
Mhm.
Tell me about that. How was that? Because that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really was. That was
Yeah.
our pop-up movie nights.
Yes.
And those
Pop-up
are-
movie nights.
Mhm,
Yes.
definitely.
Yeah.
Those are great because it really is a no pressure event and a great opportunity to meet some neighbors.
Yeah.
And for the community, you know, we had folks that walked over from the apartment complex. We had folks that I hadn't seen in forever.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, food brings people together, and, you know, a great movie really is the kind of icing on the cake, if you will.
Yeah. Just what you told me just there's like that's a measure of what impact your project has done in the community.
Speaking of impact, you know, when you talk about the fact that this is a fund that is creating returns for investors, you know, that should be impactful for sure,
Sure.
from a financial perspective. But what's more important to me is that community folks that are living right down the street, I hope that in the future, as they're walking by, they get to point out to their kids, I own a piece of that. That's
awesome.
the dream.
Yeah, that is a dream come true for
And that's
many
the
people.
impact.
Yes, that is the impact. So we're going to get to the hard part, okay?
Sure.
Okay. So I know there have been challenges. So what are the biggest challenges that you face launching the Magnolia Fund?
Growing up in Magnolia Park, never
Yeah.
thought I'd be an entrepreneur, much
Yeah.
less someone that is creating an investment
Yes.
vehicle or opportunity. So challenges for me, I think, were trying to figure out how we position ourselves. Is it a REIT, or is it, you know, a partnership, and the structure of it? We're fortunate enough to be introduced to folks that have experience in securities and in real estate, and in the
Is
on
this
the legal
actually
side of
called
things.
a REIT, which is a real estate investment trust, or is this called a private placement?
Yeah, it's definitely a private placement, but it's, you know, officially it would be a regulation CF, crowdfunding.
Right.
But what's great about the whole thing, I think, is that investors have the ability to have a say in what is going to happen to the property in the future. And so on the public side, all investors are combined into a vote that gives them the ability to exercise, you know, what they would like to see on the property
Right.
and what we end up doing when it comes to the sale of the property, if that's ever an option. So it's really not just about being an owner, but having a little bit of control.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, because normally in these types of projects, there's no control. I mean, you just put your money in there, and whoever runs the project is in control. Have you approached any setbacks, or how do you approach any setbacks? I mean, because I'm sure there'll be one.
Oh, there's
somewhere.
always there's always, I mean, there's always challenges.
Yes.
And what I learned, I guess, probably in the last 10 years, really, is as you build a company, it's important to build the team first. And so
Right.
we put together a group of advisors that have helped us understand their world and how we apply it to what we're trying to do with Magnolia Fund.
Yeah.
So on the real estate side, we have, you know, a great real estate attorney and some
Yeah.
advisors. And then on the fund formation side, we have some advisors. And then on the kitchen operation
Right.
side, we have advisors.
That's awesome. So you've got the whole community involved in this, pretty much.
Hope
right?
so, yeah. And we're adding more and more.
Yeah,
So as
that's-
people step up and say, you know what, I can really help you with this
Yes.
aspect of it, we're happy to listen.
That's good. So have you faced any resistance to the project at all? I mean, and how have you addressed it if you have?
Sure, you know, very interesting enough, we had some folks stop by one of our events, and it was 3 individuals who were from the neighborhood and flat out said, we oppose what you're doing. And
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
and it's
How did you
surprising.
address that?
I was more curious than anything,
yeah.
and I had to ask. I was like, so look, tell me what you would like to see here. And while they didn't have a real idea of what they would like to see, it was clear that the changes that they've seen in the neighborhood, they're not happy with.
Yes.
You know,
So
and I
they
even
just
asked
didn't
them.
they didn't even know what you were building there.
I think, and that's another thing I told them. I said, look, I don't think we're too far apart on this subject, and I definitely don't think we're on the opposite sides. But
Right.
I'm not here to change your mind.
Right.
If you'll allow me, let me tell you everything we're doing.
Yeah.
Because if you can hear everything we're doing and ask me questions, and based on my answers, if you still feel that, you know, we're just opposite ends of the spectrum on this issue, then I get it.
Right.
But after about 30 minutes talking to them and hearing them and allowing them to ask questions, and of course asking questions of them, and them being very earnest in their answers and very upfront. You know, I think they realize that you know, ideally, sure, if no one came into Magnolia Park and did any development, then maybe that would be okay.
Yeah.
But it's not realistic. It's already happening.
Yeah.
There's developers taking over Magnolia Park, and in fact, they're not even calling it Magnolia Park. I saw somebody call it Edo the other day, and I'm like, that's definitely wrong. And so,
completely. Yes.
Yeah. And so what was great is I said, you know, of all the things we're doing, is there anything that you feel would be beneficial? And when they looked at the project, they said, well, I can see how the kitchen would work. And so I think there's a little bit of at least compromise or the potential for understanding.
Right.
And that's what we hope to achieve. We know we're not going to make everyone happy, but we know that our project is there to create more ownership.
Right.
And we hope that that can make some folks, you know, at least very proud of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Okay. So, Erick, earlier you talked about what the community was maybe 25, 30 years ago, where people walked, you know, a lot of them stayed inside because they, you know, maybe it wasn't a good neighborhood. And now today, so do you see that this project, Magnolia Fund, will impact that? Will it make the community look different?
Yeah, you know, that actually reminds me of about maybe 10 years ago, even in Second Ward, when we started seeing people walking around at night, walking their dog. And growing up in the neighborhood, if you were walking around at night, it was very much, you just didn't do that. You know, it was a little dangerous, but also, hey, you know, like your parents always said, nothing good ever happens after dark, right?
That's right.
You come home, you stay home, you stay inside.
My grandmother used to say
that.
That's
right. But what I saw in Second Ward about even 10 years ago is people walking their dogs and they were riding their bikes.
Bicycles.
Yeah, and I thought, are you guys lost? You know, I was a little concerned for them at first, and then I realized we're doing more in this neighborhood. People are feeling safer.
Yeah.
And so what I look at is, while we have challenges in different parts of the East End. The East End is not a monolith, right? We have Second Ward, Magnolia Park, but at least when I think of our property on Harrisburg, we're going to have people there all the time. And in fact, the kitchen is going to be 24/7. So we're going to need to have security in those hours when it's at nighttime and when it's not business hours. So what I look at that is, if I'm doing that with my little property here, and then the neighbor down the street is doing the same, and they're watching out for their property, and they have people come in all over the time throughout the day and from all over the city.
Right.
You're going to have more eyeballs on the area.
Sure.
And I think that creates a safer environment. It creates a little more daylight, if you will, a little more exposure. That, I think, will help the neighborhood. And I know that residents, they are a little worried when they see these out-of-town visitors.
Yes.
And I think, to be fair, I get a little worried too, because I worry, well, how hectic is it going to be? How busy is it going to be? But I think the one thing to note, at least with our property, is our owners are from the neighborhood.
Right.
What we're doing is we're contributing to the local economy.
Erick, as we look to the future, tell us what's next for the Magnolia Fund. I mean, if you know, you have a vision, I know, because you didn't create this just, you know, for today.
Right.
You look for the future.
Yeah, you know, when you go to our WeFunder is the website that's regulated by the SEC that we have our campaign on, our investment, you can see how much we've raised. We had a goal of, you know, raising $50K on WeFunder. I think we've far exceeded that goal. Now we're trying to raise a larger goal. And so we see if we can get there, but, you know, that's sort of the top of mind goal.
Right.
But beyond that, being able to start construction, architecture, and, you know, I got that backwards, but really planning,
it all costs money.
Architecture, being able to start those things and have them on time, you know, those are some of the things I think about. And then engaging with the community. And I'll be honest with you, we did social media a year before we had the fund. And it was partly to help us understand from a community perspective who's out there and what do they want. And then we started speaking to the community and really trying to meet with folks that were in the business community. And I think we're going to continue to do those things to make sure that what we're building is not only the kitchen, but how we're charging and how we're engaging the community is welcomed by the community.
Right. I mean, this is just an exciting and innovative project, and I am glad you were able to come and meet with us here at Viva Magazine Live. And I want to thank you for such an inspiring work and for sharing your story and how you got all this started.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in. See you next week for another incredible episode of Viva Magazine Live. I'm your host, Blanca Blanco, y hasta luego, Houston.
All right, folks. I'm not sure if I'm posting this, but forgive the weird angle. I'm in the car. Don't want to bury the lead. We are passing on the Harrisburg property, which means we're no longer pursuing that as an acquisition. We're not going to purchase the Harrisburg property today. The reason we're doing that and we're making this move is that the market, from a real estate perspective, has changed, in our opinion. What we're seeing, and these are our observations, and you can look at this on websites like LoopNet, where they feature commercial properties. There are more properties available this year than there were last year. There are properties that are right next door or down the street from the Harrisburg property that have been on the market for a year or more. There are second-gen spaces available that are very intriguing because they used to be kitchens, they used to be restaurants. There are listings in the East End online that feature and offer seller financing. What this means is not only is the owner of the property going to sell to you directly, they're willing to finance it. They're willing to be the bank for you. This is, in our opinion, again, very unique. It's a very unique time in the market, and I think it's our responsibility as a fund who is taking people from the neighborhood, turning them into investors in a real estate project. We have to be very diligent about our next steps. I'm looking at this as a potential opportunity to find the best possible property at the best possible rate. But what I'm also wanting to make sure of is that we talk to our community, we communicate like we are today, we're engaging our followers to make sure that they're with us every step of the way. This should be a conversation starter, but I want you to understand how excited we are to be in a position to have a little bit of not revenue, but a little bit of investment that we could potentially negotiate with, we could potentially acquire with, depending on what the market will bear. I think we're in a really good position right now. I'd like to continue the conversation. Let me know your thoughts.